Well, cheers, everybody. Welcome to yet another video from me. I'm Hope. This is Hopefully Here Reading. And as always, I am super stoked to have you. I am going through part of my read a best book from every booktuber that I follow challenge. I was going to do all of the books in one big kind of wrap-up video, but there are just way too many. There's no way I would remember them all or be able to keep them all in my possession because I'm gonna have to go back to the library. So I'm gonna break it down because some of these are due back today. And I just thought I'm gonna film what I have, what I've read, and then when I get through the rest of them, I will do a part 2 of this. I think today we have about 15 to talk about, which is still a lot of books. So let's just get into it because I have some thoughts on a few of these. Overall, this has actually been a really great reading experience. I have had a pretty good time with almost everything I've read. I've had one DNF, and that was kind of more on me in my choosing. I decided to go pretty far out of my comfort zone for it, and it bit me in the butt a little bit, but that's nobody's fault but my own, and one that I kind of saw coming. And then I've also had a few really great surprises. Why don't we start with one of those really great surprises? And that is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. I think I've mentioned this in a video before, but this one was one of the best books of the year from Gabby Reads, and I really, really enjoyed this book. You are following A.J. Fikry, and he gets kind of put into this weird circumstance with, I don't know how much I should give away. Yeah, the book, an unexpected arrival, I guess that's what you could call it. An unexpected arrival kind of shows up, and you're just following his life, and you get little snippets through this book. Let's see if I can find one, where AJ is writing a letter to somebody, and it's kind of going through life, and you're getting these little, like, they're letters, but they're also book recommendations as you go through, and then you get the actual narrative of the story. And I thought that format for this book turned out really, really well. It's very heartwarming but heartbreaking at the same time. It's one of those stories that just, it's small, so it's a little unassuming, but the depth that it's able to get in such a short amount of time, I thought was done very, very well. I really enjoyed the love story in here. I enjoyed the overall kind of found family aspect of this, small town vibes. Like, it had a lot of very cozy things, but it's not a cozy book necessarily. I'm not really sure how to describe it beyond that. It's a nice feeling book, but it's pretty devastating at the same time. And I just really had a great time. So it's one that had been on my radar before, not on my radar, but it's a book I had heard of before, but hadn't even thought to pick out. And Gabrielle Zevin, who wrote Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and another book, she's written a few books, I believe. Her writing is so good. I'm definitely going to be trying to get to more of her stuff in the future, but I was really, really happy to pick this up. And so thank you to Gabby Reads for having this on your best of book, because it was a very good time. I should note that these are not book recommendations, obviously. These are just people's best of. It's totally on me to have picked the book off of their list. It's not like they were lists for a specific genre or anything. They were not making the recommendations. They were just saying these are my best of the year, and that's what I went off of. So they're not all these books are books that would naturally align with what I read. They're just the ones that I happened to choose at the time with what I was feeling off these people's lists. And like I said, it was pretty successful for the most part. Speaking of heartbreaking books, we have Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. And this seems to be kind of gaining in popularity right now. This one was, I'm pretty sure Sid Bookworm. She was the one that had this on her best of books. And this is another pretty devastating book. You are following, what's her name? Cassie. And she is in Silicon Valley and she is struggling with life. There is a lot of really heavy topic discussion around, like, it's particularly mental health and suicide and suicidal ideation. It's not a fun book to read, but it is a good book to read, if that makes any sense. I thought the portrayal of what life is like when you kind of have all these expectations about yourself. You're an Ivy League grad, you're at Silicon Valley, you have all these things, but what you expect life to look like and what it actually feels like are so different sometimes. And I think that was done really, really well in this book. If you are somebody who needs to look up trigger warnings though, do that for this book. I'm not typically somebody who would look up trigger warnings regardless, but I think just maybe depending on where you are in your mental state, check on those before you read this book because it gets pretty intense. The book that I finished most recently, let me get the author. I just finished The Pachinko Parlor by Eliza Shui Dusapin, and it's translated by Anissa Abbas Higgins. And this is a very slow-moving book. This was on the best books of the year by Jen Campbell. And if you know Jen Campbell, you know kind of her, the way the type of book she reads is this book very much aligns with that. It's very slow-moving, kind of a slice of life. Not a lot of, I don't even know how to describe it. There's not a lot of plot. It's very character-focused. And those are not always my favorite. I enjoyed this one enough. It wasn't my favorite. I thought it was a little too slow. I didn't think that the main character, her name is Claire, I didn't think her kind of musings were all that enlightening, or they just weren't portrayed very well. And she has this relationship. So she's gone to Tokyo to visit her grandparents and hoping to get to Korea because she's trying to really kind of figure out her identity. She doesn't have a very deep connection to her Korean Japanese roots because her grandparents are Korean, but anyways, there's a whole history there with the Japan-Korean occupation and all that history that is massive, and this book is very tiny, so you kind of get a glimpse into it when you see the way her grandparents speak and stuff, but it's not a history book. You don't get a lot of the history of what that whole situation was. And she's trying to figure out her identity. And when she's in Tokyo to visit her grandparents, she picks up this kind of part-time job where she's tutoring a student, and they kind of form this bond. And it's a very weird dynamic because it's an interesting, the student herself, Miko, I think is her name, is a really unique character, and Miko's mother is unique, and the whole thing that they're dealing with is very much a tiny subplot, but you know that they're going through things as well. And it's really just about figuring out who you are and how the past shapes your present and how you can move forward beyond that for everybody involved. And it was a interesting character study, but it's just not my type of book. Like, I don't really like those slow-paced, character-driven books, and that's what this is. I think that if you do enjoy that, you would really like this. The writing is done really well. There is enough going on that I think keep you entertained. So it was okay for me, but I can definitely see why a lot of people would probably enjoy this book if that's the type of book you are drawn to. We have Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, and this was on Jesse, Just the Reader, Jesse. This was on his best books. It's a tiny little thing. Part of the reason I picked it up is because my list had so many large books that I needed to find some small ones somewhere along the way. And so I picked this up, and I actually really enjoyed this. I've never read from I have never read from Fonda Lee before, and this is just a short story about a girl named Esther, and a manticore kills her family, and so her kind of goal in life is to become this, you kind of control these, what are they called? The giant rocks of legend are flown to hunt manticores. So they're like these massive birds kind of things, and she wants to become part of this group so that she can go out and kill manticores just as a revenge thing. And it is her journey. It does cover a pretty long span of time in such a short book. And it does create some really great relationships between her and a few of the other, what are they called? Royal Mews, MEWS. I enjoyed it. It was small, it was easy to read. It was very fantasy light, I guess, in that the creatures were fantastical, but I don't think I remember much else being too fantastical. But yeah, I enjoyed this quite a bit, and I was glad I never would have read it otherwise, except that it was on this list, and I decided to pick the smallest one that he recommended. Let's now talk about Passion Tide by Monique Roffey. And this was on Simon from Savage Reads' Favorites of 2024 list. And in this book, again, there are some pretty heartbreaking books on this list. I don't know what it was. If everybody in 2024 was just like not wallowing, but like bringing in the sadness, because there are some pretty heavy books on this list, and Passion Tide is definitely one of them. So in this book, you are following the story of this woman named Sora, and she has come to this island to celebrate Carnival, and she ends up being murdered. It's one of the first scenes, is you know that this woman has been found dead under a tree. And it's really about the other women on this island who start to mobilize around protesting in the defense of women, how women's violence has just been shoved under the rug and it's not seen as important. And they finally just kind of get themselves together, all these different women from different walks of life, to say enough is enough. And their plan is just to cause a little bit of disruption on this island, but it really has this massive ripple effect worldwide. And it's so fascinating to see how under one huge problem, when women put their minds together, what they can accomplish. You've got the president's wife has a point of view. There is a local sex worker collective. She works in favor of like protection of sex workers. You have like single mothers. You have all these different points of view, and how ultimately it's about how violence against women have really impacted their lives, and when they come together, what they can do to move forward in a movement that makes life better and safer for women. And it's a fascinating read. I really enjoyed it. I thought the different characters were really interesting. I thought the relationship between white women and black women were really interesting. The relationship between different religions was really interesting. I just thought it was very well done. And I think that even though it's at the heart of the matter, a really sad topic matter, I think there was a lot of hope and joy in the writing and in the execution of this book, and I had a really great time with it. It is a book that could definitely be something that you would see on like the Women's Prize long list nomination, just because of the content and the writing and what it is. It wouldn't surprise me if, I don't know, obviously, total side tangent eligibility, but it is one of those books where if it had shown up on that list, I would not have been surprised, and it was done really, really well. The first book I read for this challenge was A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I had never read T. Kingfisher before. Turns out that they write all over the spectrum. They've got like fantasy and YA and horror, and they're everywhere. And this was a recommendation from Freshly Read Books. I believe her name is Sarah. And I was a little cautious going into this book because I think it's supposed to be horror, but it's really not. If it's something I can read, then let's be honest, it's not horror. And it's about this woman who goes home. Her name is Sam, and she's going to stay with her mom for a bit because life has gotten a little challenging. But before she goes, she's been talking to her brother, and her brother's kind of like, Mom's been acting a little weird, so just keep an eye on her. And she gets there, and he's right. Things are weird. So when they moved into the house, they took it over from Sam's mom, and Sam's mom is an interesting character. And so they had changed a lot. They had painted the walls, they had taken off artwork, they'd put up stupid artwork like a stuffed fish or something. And when Sam comes back home, the original artwork is back, the houses have been painted, it's just kind of gone back to its original state, and she's very confused by it. And her mom seems very concerned about visitors and her being there. And she's trying to like kind of find reason in it, but there isn't much reason behind it. And things progress from there, fall apart from there, maybe is more the correct word. There's a vulture. Vultures play a role in this. Neighbors play a role in this. I thought it was okay. I don't know that I understood or really got the purpose of what was happening. Like, I feel like I feel like the author's trying to say something and I don't know what that is. I thought the ending was a little anticlimactic for myself. I enjoyed her writing. I thought her world building was done very well. But for me, it just wasn't my favorite. I think it was just a little too, like, fever dreamy, I think, for me, than I would like in my books. And that's okay. As, like, the more I sit on it, the more I kind of just think it was an okay book. It wasn't my favorite. But I can see, like, the world building and that sort of thing could definitely bring people in. And T. Kingfisher is obviously a very well-loved author and very good at it. This particular book just wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. Let's talk about the one DNF on this list. And this is, very sadly, the book that was on Win from Literary Diversions. It's Slow Days, what's it called? Slow Days Fast Company by Eve Babbitt. This was not for me. I didn't like it. I was so bored. I didn't understand the purpose of it. It just, I can't even tell you what it was about. I think it was just snippets of life. I was so confused by it. Not even confused by it. I was just so bored by it that by the time I DNF'd, I just thought, I just have no desire to pick this up anymore. Like, there's nothing offensive about it. The writing is fine. I just didn't want to read it, and I had so many books on this list to get through that I thought, I'm going to count my losses here. And I think I got about 40% in. Just not for me. I think there is a whole thing around Eve Babbitt and I guess Joan Didion, and I wanted to see what the hype was about. And unfortunately, the hype has bypassed me. That is okay, not for me. But I think if they are writers that you enjoy, obviously you would enjoy this book. I don't have a history with her as a writer, and so I was fine to kind of just let it go. Shall we continue with books that tear your heart out? And that is from Lid Loves, Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank. This book is so hard to read. It's really interesting because you think about her age and the things that she's talking about, and let me tell you, at 13 years old, I was not this articulate. I'm not this articulate at my age now. It's fascinating, and there is a quote in here, and I want to see if I can find it. Give me a second. Okay, and there's a quote in here that literally gave me goosebumps as I was reading, and I just had to take a second and think about what is happening in the world around us. And it said, writing in a diary is a really strange experience for someone like me, not only because I've never written anything before, but also because it seems to me that later on, neither I nor anyone else will be interested in the musings of a 13-year-old schoolgirl. And just to know, because she's 13 years old, and then what this book has become, I'm floored. This book has been on my TBR for ages and ages, and when I saw it on I think her name's Lydia, on her best of 2024, I finally was like, okay, it's time to read this book. And it is freaking heartbreaking. And then the epilogue, not the epilogue, but kind of what happens after, it's just terrible. And yet I'm so glad I read it. Let's just get the other heavy book out of the way, because I think the rest of them start to lighten up a little bit. And that is Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. This was on Jess Owen's Best of 2024 list, and this is a look at poverty in America and the systemic problems that goes with it and how to fix it and where we can go with it. And it's very insightful. I think the research in this is done really well. I think that he came with a preconceived notion of where he wanted the book to go. Like, I don't know that he explores every facet of the argument, which nobody can, and that's totally fine. But I think what he presents is done really well. I think he backs up his research really well. You can tell that he is an academic. Like, he's got the peer-reviewed stuff. He's got all of his footnotes. Like, it's very well researched. But I do think he wrote the book with a particular message in mind, and he really stuck with that. And that's totally fine. That's his prerogative. I think that it's done very concisely and very well. If you want to read about, in a pretty easy way, kind of where the issues of poverty don't begin, but some of the more root causes, like how it's still such an issue today, so many years later, after what was when people were hoping that some anti-poverty legislation and policies would be in place and how they've been rolled back. It's just a really fascinating look at how America, as you know, Americans consider themselves to be the greatest democracy of all time. Like, let's be honest, they do. Why this is still such an issue, and I think he presents the argument very, very well. So, again, a book. Jess Owens always seems to have really great nonfiction recommendations, and this definitely one that I appreciated that I was able to read, because it's not one that I would have picked up without it being on her list. Okay, I think we are now heading into a few lighter reads that I had a really good time with. One is Winnie-the-Pooh. I had never read this book. I don't know how I've never read Winnie-the-Pooh before, but it is adorable, and I actually want to continue reading it. I definitely know that there are like complete works of Winnie-the-Pooh, like illustrated versions and stuff, and I absolutely plan on buying a copy. This is so sweet. It's really small. If you need just the easiest of little palette cleansers, honestly, read Winnie-the-Pooh. It's adorable. I had 2 romance books on this list. One of them I actually really enjoyed and am going to continue reading in the series, and that is the Blue Rebel Ranch series, I think is what it's called, by Lila Sage. So Gavin from Gavin Reads It All, Swift and Saddled was on his best of the year list, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it because there was nothing else on his list that I felt compelled to pick up, and so I picked this one up, and I had the best time. You're following Ada, and she basically has this new job. She's recently divorced, and she falls in love with a cowboy. And it's just a really fun, easy read. I love that they both, the male and female characters, act like adults in this book. Like, the miscommunication is to a minimum. I hate when grown adults don't talk to each other. Like how these massive, tiny little things get blown up into these massive things. It's like all you had to do was have one conversation. I hate that in romance books so much. And it doesn't happen here. It's so well done. I think the main character, the male character, I don't remember his name anymore, is really supportive and tries to just kind of like be supportive of her where she is and doesn't try to change anything because she's dealing with a lot. And I loved it. I read the 3rd book after that. I haven't read the 1st book yet. They're kind of like standalones in the same world sort of thing. So reading them in order might be okay, but it's fine to me anyways, it's been fine to read them out of order. And I had a great time. The other romance, Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, was on a gazillion people's best of 2024 list. And this one I took it from the list from Jess, Peace Love Books. And I had an okay time with this. Abby Jimenez is definitely one of the romance authors that I've enjoyed enough. Part of Your World is definitely my favorite by like a long shot. But I had a decent time with this. I think it's way longer than it needs to be. I don't think a romance book needs to be this long. And like, when I say romance, I don't mean it disparagingly because, let's be honest, there's a lot of really good discussion in Abby Jimenez's books about mental health. And particularly in this one, there's a big focus on kind of parental abuse and substandard parenting. And I think that was handled okay. But there's just something missing in these relationships. This one, and in particular Yours Truly, I didn't like Yours Truly really at all. There's just something still missing in the relationships where they're a little too insta-lovey, I think. I think when these characters are dealing with such large problems, I would expect it to be a little bit more, I don't want angst, but just, I don't think it would happen as easily. Like, he's dealing with a pretty big situation with his mother and siblings, and just how quickly they're able to kind of work around that situation to start, I don't know. It's a weird thing, and I don't really know how to describe it, but there's just something to me missing in the chemistry with these characters, maybe is what my thoughts are. And I think because they're dealing with such big things outside of a relationship, that the focus they put on a relationship to me seems a little unrealistic. But that's just me and my take. I still had a good time reading this. I think obviously if you're an Abby Jimenez fan, for you, if you enjoy kind of a love story but with quite a bit more plot, definitely for you. The writing is really well done. The world is good. Like, all the characters kind of start to cross over in this series. I don't know if there's actually a name for the series, but I mean, I will continue to pick up Abby Jimenez, but this is better than Yours Truly, but Part of Your World is still #1 by her. But yeah, glad to have read it, and I was not surprised that this ended up on my list because, like I said, this was on a lot of people's best of 2024 lists. Oh, 2 ebooks. So one, Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This was Tory Between Pages. Yes, Tory Between Pages. This was on her best of 2024 list. I had such a good time with this. It is by far my favorite Brandon Sanderson. It might be the only Brandon Sanderson that I've even really, really loved. You're following Tress. She collects cups, and she gets pulled into this adventure because the boy that she loves has disappeared, and she's like, what the heck is happening? And she goes on the seas, and the seas are made of spores, and there's pirates, and there's a talking rat, and it's just a very cute, high stakes high stakes. I don't know if it's high stakes, but it's just here's the thing. The story is not necessarily fluffy, but it's written in a fluffy way, which I think Sanderson did such a great balance of that, with it being cutesy, but not fluffy. Like he just balanced the plot and the drama and the intrigue and the adventure so well with the light, fluffy writing. I think it was done masterfully, and I had such a good time reading this book. I see why it's so popular. I think if you're looking to get into Brandon Sanderson, first of all, I think this seems like a bit of a one-off. So I wouldn't say read this one to get into his other ones, because it definitely seems to be written very differently from his other books. But I think if you want to get into fantasy, this might be a good place to start. You're following just a very wholesome protagonist who does nice things, and I really had a great time. Even the kind of gorier scenes are done pretty well, and I was very surprised with how much I enjoyed this book, because I know that a lot of people have loved it, but with my history with Brandon Sanderson in the past, I wasn't sure it was going to be for me, and it was just a nice time. From Kayla, Books and Lala, I decided to read The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. It's a book that has been on my TBR, I've had in my house previously, and in this book you're following Lauren, and she comes home one day, and a dude comes down from her attic and is like, "Hey honey, you're home. I'm your husband." And she's like, I'm not married. What? She handles the situation very well, to be frank. And every time a man goes up into an attic, he disappears and a new one comes down. And it's this cycle that seemingly never ends. And you follow her for months and months, and sometimes she is able to keep somebody for longer if he's if he's good enough, nice enough, whatever it is, she allows him to stay, but tries to keep him from going into the attic. And then other ones, they come down and they're just jerks, and she immediately finds reasons for them to get back up into the attic, because she's like, "I'm not dealing with this." It's a really interesting look too at what would happen if your life just continuously reset, because sometimes she'll do something stupid and extravagant knowing that it doesn't matter, because debt doesn't really apply to her because her life is so unique in this way. And I found that really interesting. The only letdown for me in this one, I thought the ending was a little weird. I didn't know how the author was going to wrap it up, because you go further and further into this book and you're like, I just don't see how this ends. Like, I don't understand how the story can come to a conclusion in any satisfying way. And it does conclude in a way that makes sense, but I think still for me it was a little, I don't know why I was a little let down by it, because I don't know how else it could have been done. But I think the build up in the story and the plot, particularly with a few of the characters that are reoccurring, was really intriguing. I had a really good time reading this book, and I'm glad that I finally got to it, because like I said, it had been on my radar and on my TBR since I had first heard of it. Oh, guys, 2 books. Penultimately, I read The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by Kate Lumsden, and this was recommended by Hasty Books. This is a historical novel. You are following Margaret, and she decides to take up this job as a governess, essentially, for this boy in a mansion on the side of a village where people, like, they think it's haunted or something like that. They don't really, there's no connection. The village is very skeptical of people in the house, and the house tends to stay away from the people in the village. And it's just about things going a little weird. It definitely had Jane Eyre vibes, which I'm sure was done purposefully. And it was, honestly, the writing was done really well. I think for me, the story was just not my favorite type of story, I don't think, in terms of historical fiction. It was a little too surface level maybe for me. And I'm not saying it wasn't well done, because I think the writing and I think the dialogue and the character building was done really well. But I think just for me, the overarching story isn't one that I particularly enjoy. And so I don't know that I will continue on with the series, because I do believe that there is a second one. But if you like kind of historical books that aren't super academic, super deep, because I guess historical fiction can get to be that way a little bit, this could definitely be one that you would enjoy. It's very plot driven. It's actually probably a pretty good balance between character and plot, but there isn't a lot of really dry history in it. It keeps the plot keeps moving forward. I think maybe for me it dragged a little. Maybe that's the better word for it. I think there were parts of it that could have been cut out. It got a little repetitive, and I don't like that in my books. I'd rather just see the plot kind of continuing forward. And so for me, that was its one downfall. But ultimately, I still enjoyed myself. Like, it's not a book that I thought about DNFing at any time. I had a good time reading it. Just in hindsight, I'm like, I kind of wish it had moved a little further along. And the ending was a little weird, but I know that that's probably because there's going to be a second book, I imagine, or there is already a second book, I'm not sure. So it would be interesting to see where the story goes. I won't be running to pick it out, but I think if it ever showed up in some way, I would probably at least pick up the second book and see kind of how it continues on. And then finally, we have The Most by Jessica Anthony. Who recommended this book, or didn't recommend? Who did I get this from? Oh, Ink and Paper blog. And in this book, you're following a woman, Kathleen, who gets into a pool and just decides not to get out one day. And you're going back and forth between her and her husband, past timeline, present timeline, and how her husband looks at life and the way she looks at life and the things she kind of gave up for the life to have with her husband. And she's kind of like just thinking back on her decisions and whether or not that they were the right ones, because I don't think she regrets where she is in life, but just how life could have turned out differently. And I think a lot of people do that. We kind of think, what if I had said yes or no to this instead of what I did do, and where would my life look now? And there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think, because it's like, I'm content with where I am. You're just still just kind of curious about where things could have diverged off of the path that you're on now. And I thought it was a really good look at identity as a woman and as a mother and as a wife, and what that can do to you inside and outside, and how that makes people see you. And then also with him, the husband, just kind of his expectations of life and what he kind of did to hinder his own development, sort of, and the development in his relationship. And I thought the writing was really interesting. It's a very short book, and I would say if you're looking for a book to just sit down and read in kind of one sitting, you could definitely do it with this one. I had a good time. Okay, I think that was a lot of talking, but I think that is the first part of my reading a book from every booktuber I follow best list of 2024. That's way too long of a mouthful, and I do look forward to getting these back to the library, because then I can stop looking at them, because it's kind of freaking me out. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to read all these books. So to get rid of some of them would be nice. I still have 7 or 8 still to go, which is so many, but we're gonna work our way through. But that is it for now. Tell me if you have read any of the best of 2024 from your favorite booktubers. What were they? Did you love them? And maybe I will also add them to the 2025 TBR, which is starting to get a little long. But for now, I'm gonna drink my coffee. I'm gonna read some more books, and I will see you in the next video.